Hello, President Trump has said the US will not lift its blockade on Iranian ports until a deal has been reached with Tehran. It comes at the end of the two-week ceasefire looms with no sign of an extension. Iran's chief negotiators also cast fresh doubt on a second round of peace talks, stating Tehran was prepared to show new cards on the battlefield. The US Vice-President JD Vance, who's due to lead the American team in Pakistan, is said to be preparing to leave Washington soon. And a few hours ago, Donald Trump posted this on social media. Operation Midnight Hammer was a complete and total obliteration of the nuclear dust sites in Iran. Therefore, digging it out will be a long and difficult process. Our North America correspondent David Willis reports.
It's being reported here that the US Vice-President JD Vance is due to leave the country later today, Tuesday, for those peace talks in the Pakistani capital, Islamabad. It was thought at one stage that he would be en route by now, and the fact that he isn't and has spent the night in Washington, D.C. can perhaps be attributed to the fact that there is uncertainty over whether the Iranian delegation is going to be present at those talks. Iran has accused the United States of violations of the terms of the ceasefire agreement, in particular by blockading Iranian ports, and that is something that caused the chief negotiator on Iran's part to take to social media last night to say that President Trump was, in his words, seeking to turn the negotiating table into a table of surrender. Iran doesn't negotiate under the shadow of threats, that social media post concluded. Lifting that US blockade on Iranian ports could prompt the Iranian delegation to return to negotiations in Islamabad. But in a social media post of his own, Donald Trump said that the blockade would remain in place, as he put it, until a firm deal, a long-lasting deal, was reached with Iran. Mr. Trump, of course, is eager for a deal. He doesn't want to see another rise in oil prices, and he wants to see the Strait of Hormuz reopened. That has virtually ground to a standstill once again. The US also wants Tehran to hand over its enriched uranium supplies, and that is something that Tehran has said is non-negotiable. So it does seem that the maximum that Iran is willing to give is less than the minimum the US is demanding. All this and still uncertainty surrounding a next stage of peace talks, with the clock ticking down to the end of that ceasefire agreement.
David Willis, the BBC's chief international correspondent Lyse Doucet's been telling me about the Iranian position on entering negotiations. She's reporting from Tehran on condition none of her material is used on the BBC's Persian service. These restrictions apply to all international media organisations operating in Iran.
In public, Iranian officials say that so far, and they emphasize so far they haven't made a decision as to whether to go to Islamabad. In private, officials tell us that they do want to continue the negotiating track, but only under the right conditions and at the right time, even before the incident in the Strait of Hormuz on Sunday, where for the first time in this crisis, the US Navy fired on, boarded and seized an Iranian vessel. Iran was saying that it didn't want to resume talks while the US naval blockade was still in force. It's also concerned about what was yesterday another stream of social media posts and interviews by President Trump, where he veers from military threats against Iran and then declaring that a deal can be done in a day. Iran feels that President Trump is trying to exert even more pressure, and you saw that in posts both by the lead negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, saying that they wanted to negotiate in a calm environment, but that they wouldn't surrender to threats. I mean, you have to bear in mind that President Trump pulled out of the last nuclear accord in his first term. The last two rounds of talks before this war with the United States were shattered by the onset of war. So Iran wants to be careful. There's a deep well of distrust, which of course goes back 47 years between these two countries. But Iran also has some tough decisions to make. It's under pressure from hardliners here. They don't want to make many compromises, and yet compromises will be needed if there is a deal to be done. So there are pressures from all sides.
Lyse, President Trump says the naval blockade by the US of the Strait of Hormuz is costing Iran $500 million a day. He says that's destroying Iran. Do you get a sense of that economic pain there?
There was economic pain in Iran even before this war. When we came in February, it was staggering to see that inflation here was running at 60%. People are living under those sanctions that make everyday tasks like a bank account, like travel, doing ordinary daily things are impossible here because you're strangled in this web of international sanctions. And now, when we go to the markets, the prices are even higher. One economist said inflation was now around 72%. We went to a pharmacy where you could see on the worried expressions of people there, the prices are higher. Some of the drugs they rely on, including insulin, are hard to find. And if they are hard to find, if you can find them, they're still expensive. And some imported brands aren't entering, again, because of the sanctions. Iranians want those sanctions to be lifted. The negotiators know that. But there are Iranians who say to us, those who don't support the government, who say we don't want a deal because we don't want to keep this order in place. And yet someone at a fruit and vegetable shop said to us, as we talked about the higher prices, he said, I don't want there to be a deal because I want to inflict even greater pain on the United States. So it's a little reminder of the churn of emotions and the different directions in which this country is pulling now.
And Lyse, you touched on tensions, even splits in the Iranian leadership. Tell us a little more about what you know about what's going on that we can't see.
Well, you can see it even if you are here. I think it would be too strong a word to say splits. We have seen the disagreements, if you like, emerging in what is said on different media aligned to, for example, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the powerful forces, who, by all accounts, are the ones who are literally calling the shots in this war. But at the very top, the new leadership, which has formed after those multiple high-level assassinations during those weeks of war, they have some very clear ideas about where Iran sits, how Iran sees the future of its nuclear program, what the fate of the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran doesn't want to give up. It now sees it not just as leverage in these negotiations, but long-term leverage, also an economic lifeline to get out of the stranglehold of sanctions. So decisions here have always been made by consensus, and President Trump likes to say he's found the decision maker. That's not the system in Iran. They have their own sorting to do, and they have their own very tough decisions to make about how much they want to do a deal. And there is a view that if they see a bad deal on the table, they'll take a bad war instead.
That's Lyse Doucet, who's in Tehran. Let's take you to the city where talks, if they happen, will be taking place, Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan. Preparations there still in place for possible talks. We've been hearing about security checkpoints and posters saying Islamabad talks lining the streets. Let's hear some more from our correspondent who's there in Islamabad, Caroline Davies. Caroline, how confident is Pakistan that these talks are actually going to happen?
I think that is obviously the really big question, is whether or not we will see these delegations arriving here in Pakistan for these talks. Behind the scenes, we haven't had a huge amount of communication from the Pakistan authorities here about one way or another. I think quite often they're trying to let the two sides, both Tehran and Washington, be the ones that lead this conversation at the moment. They've been doing obviously a lot of intermediary work. We know that back channel has been operated by Pakistan for several weeks, and we imagine that is still ongoing at the moment. But we've been getting a lot of mixed messages as we've heard from both Lyse in Tehran, and of course as we've also been hearing out of Washington about whether or not these talks are going ahead from the Iranian side, saying that they have no plans to attend these negotiations and these discussions. In particular, the parliamentary speaker Galabaf saying that they would not do so under threat. And we actually got something similar this morning from, let me just read you the post from the Iranian ambassador here to Pakistan, who says, "It's a truth universally acknowledged that a single country in possession of a large civilization will not negotiate under threat and force." So again, that same message that's coming out from Iran, saying that they will not come to the negotiation table as long as these measures they think are in place that are putting them under threats. From President Trump's side, he has been talking about the fact that he doesn't feel any pressure to try to find a deal, but that also he thinks that a deal will be done. The big question, of course, is will we see people come to the table here in Islamabad? Pakistan has been ready for several days. We've seen these sorts of measures in place. A large amount of the city is still essentially in lockdown here, just waiting for that further news. We also understand, because we've seen some US military aircraft coming in, while of course the key principals are not coming in from the delegations. We believe that will be the sort of security measures that will be being put in place potentially before these talks happen. So lots of things going on behind the scenes here in Islamabad. But the big question is, are we going to have both sides coming back to the table and sitting around it again? That is still uncertain.
Caroline, briefly, if you will, why Pakistan? Why has Pakistan chosen to put itself firmly at the centre of this diplomatic process?
Well, it's in an interesting position between the two countries, and it's walking that tightrope at the moment. For Iran's side, it's obviously a neighbour with Iran. It shares a 900-kilometre or so border. They refer to each other as brotherly nations. There's a historic relationship there. And from the American side, that seems to be a more personal dynamic, particularly at the moment. President Trump seems to have a good relationship with the head of Pakistan's military, Field Marshal Asim Munir, regularly referring to him as his favourite field marshal. And so it seems like Pakistan is able to, at the moment, keep that balance and be the party that is passing messages back and forth, if not also doing some form of intermediary work as well, making sure that trying to get both sides to the table and keep momentum going behind these talks. So far, both sides have been praising of Pakistan's role as well. They seem to have been able to retain that trust on both sides. But the big question is, Pakistan is not in a position to strong-arm either side to get to the negotiating table. It will be down to whether both sides think that they feel that there is something on the table that they can get out of this discussion, out of this negotiation. So still a lot of anticipation, a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty about whether these talks are going to take place.
Thanks very much, Caroline Davies in Islamabad, where those talks will take place if they indeed happen. We'll be talking to our correspondents in Islamabad and Tehran, of course, throughout the forthcoming hours. Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz for the first time since the closure of the vital energy passageway. Speaking by phone to the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, President Xi said the Strait of Hormuz should remain open for normal passage, which aligns with the common interest of countries in the region and the international community.